On Christmas Eve, a billionaire collapses in his office, poisoned. His only hope. A terrified 5-year-old girl who whispers, "I saw him put something in your coffee." The city glittered with Christmas lights that reflected in every window of the towering Hale Corporation building, casting warm colors onto the marble floors where 5-year-old Emily Hart followed quietly behind her mother. Emily wore her favorite red dress, the one that made her feel brave, though tonight her bravery came more from necessity than choice. Mary, her mother, worked the night shift as a cleaner, and when there was no babysitter available, Emily had to come along, clutching her small coloring book and trying her best to stay unnoticed. She knew the rules: don't run, don't talk loudly, and never open doors without permission. But curiosity, especially when paired with childhood innocence, often slipped through cracks that adults easily ignored. Mary had stepped into a supply room, leaving Emily to wait on a bench in the hallway. But the bench was cold, and the corridor was long, glowing with the kind of lights that buzz softly and make the world feel bigger than it is. Emily's feet dangled as she looked around, wondering whether she should ask her mother again where the bathroom was. Finally, she stood and walked slowly along the corridor, tracing her fingers along the smooth wall as she passed door after door. Most offices were dark at this hour, but at the very end of the hall, she noticed one room still illuminated, golden light spilling through the narrow space beneath the door. She recognized it immediately: Mr. Hale's office. Everyone whispered about him, the billionaire, the genius, the man whose name seemed carved into every corner of the building. Emily had never met him, but she had seen his portrait in the lobby. His eyes in the picture were strikingly blue, his expression calm and distant. Her mother had always told her to stay away from the office because it was important and private. Emily fully intended to walk past it. She really did. But then she heard a faint movement inside. Curiosity pulled her closer. She peeked through the barely open door, expecting to see the famous Mr. Hale working late. Instead, she saw a man she didn't recognize. He wore an expensive suit, though his jacket was wrinkled and his movements jittery, not at all like the confident people Emily saw during the day. He stood near the desk, Mr. Hale's desk, and Emily's eyes widened as she watched him glance over his shoulder, as if making sure no one was watching. Her breath caught when she saw what he did next. The man pulled a small packet from his pocket, tore it open, and poured fine white powder into the coffee cup sitting on the desk. He stirred it quickly with a pen, wiped the rim with his sleeve, then looked around one last time before slipping out through the side door. Emily pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She didn't understand exactly what she had witnessed, but she knew enough to know it was wrong, dangerously wrong. Her mother always told her that if something felt wrong, she had to tell someone, even if adults didn't always listen to children. She stepped into the office, trembling slightly. The cup still sat on the desk, looking perfectly innocent. She stared at it, remembering the man's hurried movements. Her instinct screamed at her, do something, warn someone, find help. But who would believe her? She was only a little girl, invisible to most adults in this building. A sudden sound of footsteps made her jump. She turned just as a tall figure entered through the main door, silhouetted by the hallway lights. Dark hair, sharp shoulders, and those unmistakable blue eyes, he looked just like the portrait in the lobby. Mr. Hale. He looked surprised to find a child standing in his office so late at night, but Emily didn't give him time to ask questions. Fear and urgency burst out of her in one breath as she rushed toward him and grabbed his sleeve with both hands. I saw him put something in your coffee, she cried, her voice shaking but determined. Daniel Hale blinked, taken aback not just by her presence but by her words. Who did? He asked, lowering himself slightly so he could look her in the eyes. I don't know his name, she stammered. But he was in here, and he put white stuff in your cup. I swear I saw him. Daniel's brows drew together. The idea seemed impossible. No one could simply walk into his office, and children often misunderstood things. He glanced at the untouched cup on his desk, then back at the trembling girl whose eyes shimmered with desperation. "Sweetheart," he began gently, "maybe you imagined." "No." Emily interrupted, her voice breaking. "I didn't imagine it." She looked up at him with such raw fear that for a moment he hesitated. But then he exhaled slowly, offering her a calm smile, clearly convinced this was just a misunderstanding. "Thank you for telling me," he said kindly. "I'll make sure everything is all right." But as he stepped toward the desk, Emily's little hand remained clutched around his, refusing to let go. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this single act of courage, would change everything. Daniel Hale entered his office expecting nothing more than a late-night continuation of paperwork, but instead he found a trembling little girl clutching his sleeve as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Emily looked up at him with wide blue eyes full of fear and urgency, and for a brief moment he forgot every rehearsed sentence, every business concern, every polished detail of his controlled life. Children were rare sights in these halls, and one standing in his private office with tears in her eyes felt even more surreal. He crouched so he could meet her at eye level, hoping to steady her enough to understand what she meant. Her words, "I saw him put something in your coffee," still echoed in his mind, strange and impossible. He spoke softly, the way he would have calming a frightened animal. "Emily, is it? Can you tell me exactly what you saw?" She nodded rapidly, her small fingers tightening around the fabric of his suit. "A man came into your office," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He wasn't supposed to be here. He looked scared, or angry. I don't know. He took something from his pocket and put it in your cup. It looked like sugar but, it wasn't." She swallowed hard, as if the memory itself frightened her. "I didn't know what to do. I tried to find my mom but she wasn't done working yet." Daniel felt the faintest chill crawl up his spine. He looked over at the coffee cup sitting innocently on his desk, steam no longer rising from it but still giving off a faint, bitter scent. He had been drinking coffee every night this week, there was nothing unusual about that. He straightened slightly, keeping his tone calm. "Emily, thank you for telling me. But are you absolutely certain? Sometimes shadows or reflections." She shook her head fiercely, her bun wobbling with the motion, the red ribbon slipping slightly. "I'm sure. I'm really sure." He poured it in and mixed it with a pen. "I saw it all. I know I'm little but I'm not lying." Her voice cracked on the last word. Tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't back away. Instead she lifted her chin, trying desperately to be brave. The sight made Daniel hesitate. Most children cried when frightened. Few stood their ground to defend what they believed. Still, logic overpowered concern. The office was secured, entry was logged electronically. Every movement in the building was monitored. She must have misunderstood something. "It's very late, and you've had a long day," he said gently. "I think you might have been confused." Emily pulled her hand back as if burned. The heartbroken confusion on her face struck him with unexpected force. "You don't believe me," she whispered. "Even though I'm telling the truth." Daniel opened his mouth to reassure her, but the words stuck. How could he believe the impossible? And yet, there was something about her expression, so raw, so desperate, that made him pause. He looked again at the cup. The smell did seem odd. Bitter, but sharper than usual. He reached for it. "Don't!" Emily gasped, grabbing his wrist with both hands, her voice so panicked it echoed off the walls. "Emily!" He began, but she shook her head violently. "Please. Please don't drink it. If you do you'll get sick or die. I don't want you to die." Her sincerity, her terror, real and trembling, made his breath hitch. He slowly pulled his hand away from the cup. His mind raced through possibilities he normally would have dismissed instantly. Could someone actually want to harm him? He had enemies, yes, but so did every man in his position. None, however, had ever taken action bold enough to cross into criminal territory. Or so he believed. He stood up and pressed a button on the wall. Security would come, check the cup, calm the child, confirm this was nothing. But he couldn't shake the unease tightening in his chest. As they waited, he turned back to her. "Emily, where's your mother?" "She's cleaning the floor downstairs," she whispered, still trembling. "She said to wait on the bench, but I got scared. I heard noises and I had to see what it was." Daniel nodded slowly. He could dismiss fear, coincidence, misunderstanding, but he could not dismiss courage. And this child, shaking before him, had shown more courage than most adults he had ever met. The door opened and two security officers stepped in. Emily flinched behind Daniel, clutching his pant leg. He looked down at her and felt a strange protective pull, one he couldn't identify but didn't resist. "Test the coffee," he ordered quietly. "Thoroughly." As one officer collected the cup with gloved hands, Emily peeked up at Daniel. "Did I do good?" she asked in a small voice. Her question struck him harder than her warning. "Yes, Emily," he said softly, surprising himself. "You did very good." For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe. And for the first time, Daniel felt the unsettling premonition that this little girl, this slip of a child in a red dress, had stepped into his life for a reason he did not yet understand. The hallway outside Daniel's office felt unnaturally still after security escorted Emily and her mother away to wait downstairs. Daniel remained alone for several minutes, staring at the empty space where the cup had been. He had expected the security team to return quickly with a report that would put the matter to rest. Perhaps it was a harmless substance, perhaps Emily had simply misunderstood. Children sometimes did. And yet, the trembling certainty in her voice replayed itself through his mind with disturbing insistence. He rubbed his temples, feeling an unfamiliar heaviness settling behind his eyes. Fatigue, he told himself. It had been an exceptionally long week. But then the dizziness came. It started subtly, a faint tilt to the room as if the floor had shifted an inch beneath his feet. Daniel blinked hard and steadied himself against the edge of the desk. He assumed it was just exhaustion, but the sensation deepened quickly, climbing in intensity until the walls seemed to ripple and the lights above grew painfully bright. A hot wave of nausea rolled through him, forcing him to grip the desk harder. This wasn't normal. His breath quickened. He swallowed, trying to steady himself, but the metallic taste rising at the back of his throat made his stomach lurch. His skin felt cold, sweat dampening his collar as another wave of dizziness crashed over him, stronger than the first. He reached for his phone but misjudged the distance, knocking it off the desk. It clattered to the floor, the sound echoing far too loudly for something so small. His fingers trembled violently. His heart pounded in a strange, irregular rhythm that made his chest feel tight and hollow at the same time. Fear crept in. Not the abstract fear of losing status or business, but something primal. Bodily. Immediate. He staggered backward, trying to reach the door, but his legs buckled. The polished floor rushed up at him, and he caught himself on one knee, breathing shallowly as the room spun in circles. He tried again to stand, but this time his vision blurred at the edges, darkening quickly like a lens slowly closing. A thought cut through the haze with terrifying clarity. Emily was right. He had taken a sip. Just one. Just enough. He forced his hand forward, trying to grab the corner of the desk to pull himself up, but his muscles felt heavy, unresponsive, as though someone had drained the strength from them. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breaths came out in short, ragged bursts. He didn't understand what the substance was, but whatever it might be, it was fast-acting. Panic flickered in his chest. He had survived corporate wars, threats, betrayals, yet here he was, helpless on the floor of his own office, taken down by a single sip of coffee he never should have touched. And all because he hadn't listened to a child's warning. He tried to call out, but his voice cracked. The sound that escaped him was barely a rasp. His vision blurred fully now, shapes becoming shadows, lights becoming streaks. He blinked, trying to force clarity, but the darkness only thickened. Then he heard footsteps. Small ones. "Mr. Hale," came a tiny, tremulous voice from the doorway. Emily. She must have slipped away from her mother again, worried about him. He heard the quick patter of her shoes as she approached, and then her gasp, a small, sharp sound that pierced through the ringing in his ears. She dropped to her knees beside him. "I told you," she whispered, her voice breaking as tears filled her eyes. "I told you something bad would happen." Daniel tried to steady his breathing, tried to reassure her somehow, but he could barely form words. He lifted his hand weakly, wanting to tell her he was sorry, that she had been brave, that he should have believed her. His fingers brushed her sleeve, barely making contact. "Help." He managed to choke out. That was all she needed. Emily bolted from the room with surprising speed for such tiny legs, shouting for help with a desperation that echoed down the long corridor. Her voice cut through the silence, sharp, frightened, determined. Moments later, several employees rushed inside. Someone knelt beside Daniel, another called emergency services, another tried to assess the situation. Daniel couldn't make out the faces, but he heard the urgency in their voices, each one confirming his fear. This was not exhaustion. This was poison. Emily's sobs filled the room as she clung to her mother. She kept repeating the same words, broken and trembling, "I didn't want him to die. I didn't want him to die." The last thing Daniel saw before the darkness pulled him under was the small, tear-streaked face of the little girl who had tried to save him, and had become the only reason he might survive. Hours later, Daniel awoke to the sterile brightness of a hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of machines grounding him in a reality that felt both distant and painfully vivid. His body ached with exhaustion, his mind foggy from whatever toxin had been in the coffee, but the worst part was the memory of collapsing on the floor, powerless and alone, until a small pair of hands and a trembling voice had called for help. As his eyes adjusted, he noticed an 4-line taped to his arm and a nurse checking his vitals. She offered him a reassuring smile, explaining that the poison had been identified and neutralized in time. "It was a close call," she said, "far too close," and Daniel felt the weight of that truth settle heavily on his chest. The door opened quietly, and Mary stepped inside, holding Emily's hand. The little girl looked even smaller in the hospital lighting, her red dress wrinkled, her eyes swollen from crying. She hesitated near the door as though afraid she might disturb him or, worse, find him angry. Daniel pushed himself up on the pillows, wincing slightly, and motioned her closer. Emily approached with careful steps, like a frightened rabbit unsure whether to flee or stay. Her tiny fingers twisted nervously in the fabric of her dress. "Hi," she whispered, as though speaking too loudly might hurt him. Daniel studied her face, noticing the dried tear tracks, the trembling of her lower lip, the fear she tried to hide. He felt something unfamiliar tug at him, a protective instinct so sudden and fierce it startled him. "Hi, Emily," he said softly. "Come here." She stepped closer until she stood beside the bed, looking up at him with those huge blue eyes. Are you alive?" she asked, her voice cracking. A quiet laugh escaped him, though it held no humor. "Yes. Because of you." Saying the words made his throat tighten. He had dismissed her, doubted her, and nearly paid with his life. "You saved me," he added. "I should have listened when you tried to warn me." Emily shook her head quickly, tears gathering again. "I didn't want anything bad to happen to you. I was so scared. When you fell, I thought you were gone." Mary gently squeezed her daughter's shoulder, looking overwhelmed with gratitude and guilt. I told her she must have misunderstood, she admitted quietly. I thought maybe she imagined it. But she insisted something was wrong, and when she saw you on the floor. Mary's voice broke. She didn't stop screaming until help came. I don't know what would have happened if she hadn't. Daniel exhaled slowly, absorbing the enormity of what the child had done. Emily, he said, turning back to her, you were braver than most adults I know. You didn't let fear stop you, not even when I doubted you. Emily bit her lip. You didn't believe me, she whispered. No, he admitted, shame tugging at him. And I was wrong. I'm very grateful you didn't give up. She looked at him for a long moment, searching for sincerity. When she found it, her small shoulders relaxed a little. I just wanted you to be okay. Daniel felt his throat tighten again. For a man used to living in a world of contracts, negotiations, and guarded intentions, the purity of her concern overwhelmed him. This child, who owed him nothing, who barely knew him, had fought harder for his life than people who claimed loyalty to him. A doctor entered then, explaining the severity of the poison, how it acted quickly and would have killed him if he'd taken more than a sip. Daniel nodded, listening but already scanning through the implications in his mind. This was no random act. Someone had tried to murder him. Someone who had access to his office. Someone who knew his routine. And someone who hadn't hesitated to take an innocent life if she got in the way. When the doctor left, Daniel looked at Mary. Your daughter may have saved more than one life tonight. She's incredibly strong. Mary brushed a hand over Emily's hair, pride and fear mixing in her eyes. She's all I have. I'm just thankful she's safe. Daniel's gaze drifted back to the girl beside him. Emily, he said gently, I want you to know something. What you did took courage, real courage. You didn't imagine anything. You saw the truth when no one else could. And you weren't afraid to tell it. I was afraid, she whispered. He nodded. But you didn't let fear stop you. That's what makes you brave. Her eyes shimmered again, but this time not with despair. She reached out timidly, placing her small hand over his. Please don't drink anything without looking first, she said earnestly, her voice soft but determined. The corner of Daniel's mouth lifted in a faint smile. I promise, he said. No more coffee without supervision. Emily's expression relaxed slightly at his attempt at humor, and for the first time since the incident, she smiled, small, fragile, but real. As she stood there holding his hand, Daniel realized something unsettling and undeniable. In one night, this child had become entwined with his fate. Her warning had saved his life. Her courage had exposed danger hiding in his shadow. And her presence, oddly, had filled the sterile hospital room with something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. He didn't know yet how deep the conspiracy went, who wanted him dead, or what price would be paid for uncovering the truth. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty, Emily Hart had become a part of his story now. And he could not, would not, let anything happen to her. The investigation moved quickly once the toxicology results confirmed the presence of a sophisticated poison in Daniel's bloodstream. By morning, Hale Corporation became a storm of hushed conversations, panicked whispers, and frantic attempts to understand how one of the most secure offices in the city had been breached. Daniel's collapse, kept out of the public eye for the moment, was known only to upper management and security personnel, but rumors spread like wildfire among the employees who had seen ambulances outside in the middle of the night. Daniel, still recovering in the hospital, insisted on being briefed immediately. His voice was steady, but an undercurrent of simmering resolve ran beneath every word. He had survived the attempt, but the knowledge that someone within his trusted circle had tried to kill him ignited something dangerous and cold inside him. Security Chief Lawson stood at the foot of the hospital bed, flipping through a tablet. His tone was careful, respectful, but grim. We reviewed the camera footage on your floor. 2 external angles caught a man entering your office around the time Emily described. He tapped the screen and turned it toward Daniel. A grainy video showed a figure moving down the hallway with deliberate steps, head tilted down as if avoiding eye contact with the cameras. Even with the pixelation, Daniel recognized the posture instantly, the rigid shoulders, the confident stride. Michael Rhodes, Daniel said quietly. Lawson nodded. Your business partner. The words felt surreal coming from someone else's mouth, as if they belonged to a different world. Michael had been by his side for years, through expansions, mergers, and late-night strategy battles. They had built an empire together. But now, as Daniel watched the footage, he saw the truth Emily had tried to warn him about, Michael walking into his office with a small packet in hand, glancing around like a thief, pouring something into the coffee cup with practiced ease. At one point, he even paused and looked toward the door, toward the hallway where Emily must have been standing. His expression in that split second was enough to crush any remaining doubt. There was calculation in his eyes, sharp and merciless. Why? Daniel asked, though deep down he already knew. Ambition was a powerful poison long before it mixed with any white powder. Lawson hesitated. We think he wanted control of the company. There are irregularities in the financial logs, several unauthorized transfers, all designed to frame you. If you had died, the board would have been forced to hand him temporary command while the investigation unfolded. Eventually he would have made that position permanent. Daniel closed his eyes, absorbing the betrayal like a blow. He had given Michael trust, opportunity, access, but none of that mattered to a man whose hunger for power outgrew loyalty. When Daniel opened his eyes again, the softness was gone. A colder, sharper resolve had taken its place. Where is he now? Missing, Lawson said. He didn't come home last night. His phone is off. His car is gone. We're working with authorities to find him. Daniel's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the door creaked open. Emily stood at the threshold, her small frame partially hidden behind the nurse who had escorted her. Her blue eyes darted from Lawson to Daniel, searching for reassurance, for safety, for answers. Come in, Daniel said gently, motioning her closer. Emily hurried to his side, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. She looked up at Lawson, then back to Daniel. Did they catch the bad man? She asked in a small, trembling voice. Not yet, Daniel said honestly, and he saw the fear return to her expression. Immediately, he softened his tone. But they will. And I promise you, he won't hurt you. Emily's lips pressed together as she nodded, though her fingers twisted nervously in the rabbit's fur. He looked at me, she whispered. When he was leaving your office. I think he saw me. The implications of that made the room freeze. Daniel exchanged a sharp glance with Lawson. If Michael had seen Emily, then she wasn't just a witness, she was a threat to him. And threats were often handled just as ruthlessly as business rivals. Lawson cleared his throat. We'll increase security around both of you, he said. No one gets near this room without clearance. And your home will be secured as well. Emily leaned closer to Daniel, pressing her face into the blanket beside him. He rested his hand lightly on her back, feeling the tension in her tiny shoulders. She had saved his life, and now her own was in danger because of it. The thought ignited fury inside him, fury at Michael, fury at his own blindness, fury at how close they had all come to tragedy. Mary entered the room moments later, relief washing over her face as she saw her daughter safe and Daniel awake. But when she learned Michael had not been caught, her expression shifted to fear. We can't go home, can we? She whispered. No, Lawson answered before Daniel could. It's not safe. Mary swallowed hard and nodded. Emily reached for her mother's hand, and Mary squeezed it tightly. Then the little girl turned back to Daniel and said something that stunned everyone in the room. "I don't want him to hurt you again," she murmured. "Or Mommy. Or me. I don't want anyone to die." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't just a frightened child, this was a child who understood danger with a depth no 5-year-old should ever have to grasp. He reached out, brushing a stray golden curl away from her forehead. "No one will die," he said quietly. "Not you. Not your mom. And not me. I promise you." Emily nodded, but remained close, as if proximity alone could protect him. As the nurse led the visitors out, Daniel looked back at Lawson. "Find him," he said, voice low but steeled with determination. "Before he tries anything else." Lawson nodded and left the room with urgency. Daniel lay back against the pillows, closing his eyes for a moment. He was still weak, still healing, but his mind was sharper than ever. There were layers to peel back, secrets to uncover, traps to dismantle. And no matter the cost, he would not allow a man like Michael Rhodes to threaten them again. Because now something had changed, not just in the corporate world, not just in the investigation, but in Daniel himself. He wasn't fighting only for his life anymore. He was fighting for hers. Authorities worked tirelessly through the night, tracing phone records, reviewing traffic cameras, and questioning anyone who might have seen Michael Rhodes leave the building. Yet every report returned the same answer: he had vanished. The idea that the man who had tried to poison him was now loose somewhere in the city created a tension that made Daniel's recovery feel secondary. He remained in the hospital under strict supervision, but his thoughts never stayed in the room. They kept circling back to Emily, her trembling voice, her terrified eyes, her insistence that Michael had looked directly at her. The realization haunted him. If Michael knew she was a witness, he would never let her simply walk away. By the following morning, Daniel had already argued with 3 doctors, trying to convince them to discharge him early. He was still weak, but adrenaline had a way of drowning out fatigue. His demand was interrupted by Lawson entering the room with a grim expression. "We've got new information," the security chief said, closing the door behind him. "We found Michael's car abandoned in an underground parking structure several blocks from the company. But that's not all." He hesitated, and the hesitation made Daniel's pulse quicken. "We also found evidence suggesting he accessed personnel files before disappearing. Files containing detailed information on all employees, including Emily and her mother." The implication hit like a blow. Daniel sat up straighter, ignoring the sharp pain in his shoulder. "He's looking for them," he said. "He knows they saw him." Lawson nodded. "We believe he may attempt to eliminate any loose ends." Before Daniel could respond, shouting erupted in the hallway. Muffled at first, then growing sharper, more panicked. He recognized Mary's voice. She was calling out her daughter's name. Daniel's body reacted before his mind fully registered the fear. He forcefully removed the 4-needle, ignoring the sting, and swung his legs off the bed. Lawson tried to stop him, but Daniel shoved past and burst into the hallway. Mary stood in the center of the corridor, pale and frantic, turning in circles as tears streamed down her cheeks. "She's gone," she cried. "Emily is gone. She was right beside me, and then she wasn't." I looked away for 1 second. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she pointed toward the elevator. "I think someone took her." Daniel's vision narrowed, flooded with cold fury. He didn't feel the weakness anymore. He didn't feel anything except the determination that nothing, would happen to that little girl. He sprinted down the hall, Lawson close behind, as they reached the elevators. One security guard shouted that a man had been seen moments earlier dragging a child toward the stairwell, but no one reacted fast enough because the hospital was full of frantic families and uniformed staff. The description was vague, but the terror in Mary's voice made everything clear. Daniel descended 2 flights of stairs at a pace that made his heart hammer, but he didn't slow. When he reached the parking garage level, a chilling sound froze him in place, Emily's voice, faint but terrified. "Let me go." Daniel followed the sound, turning a corner sharply. There, in the dim light between concrete pillars, he saw Michael Rhodes holding Emily by the arm, pulling her backward as she tried to resist. Her little face was streaked with tears, but she wasn't screaming now, she looked too frightened to make a sound. Michael was disheveled, eyes wild, suit stained, desperation radiating from him like heat. "She won't shut up," he hissed when he saw Daniel. "She saw everything. She ruined everything. If she talks, I go to prison. So don't come closer." "Let her go," Daniel said, taking a step forward. His voice was low, controlled, but edged with something sharp and dangerous. "She's a child, Michael. She didn't ruin your life. You did." Michael shook his head violently, tightening his grip on Emily's arm. She whimpered softly, trying to pull away. "I didn't work for years to be second to you. This company was supposed to be mine. You don't deserve it. You never did. You tried to kill me," Daniel said slowly. "And now you're threatening a 5-year-old. What does that make you? A leader? A visionary? Or just a coward?" Michael's expression twisted, rage mixing with panic. "Stay back," he warned, pulling something from his pocket, a small knife. Emily froze, her breath catching. When Daniel saw the blade, something primal surged inside him. He stepped forward again, ignoring Lawson's warning shout behind him. "Let her go," he repeated, his tone flat and steady, as if daring Michael to challenge him. "You won't risk her life," Michael spat. "You're too noble. That's why you always lose." Daniel didn't answer. He moved faster than anyone expected, especially Michael. With a sudden burst of strength, he lunged forward, grabbing Michael's wrist and twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the floor, and Emily stumbled free, running straight into Daniel's arms. He pulled her behind him, shielding her with his body as Michael swung wildly, fueled by panic. But Lawson and 2 guards arrived at that moment, tackling Michael to the ground. Emily clung to Daniel, sobbing into his shirt, her tiny body shaking uncontrollably. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly he feared he might crush her, but she only buried herself deeper into him, as if trying to disappear inside the one place she now trusted most. "It's over," Daniel murmured, lowering his forehead to hers as she hiccuped through tears. "You're safe now. I promise you, you're safe." She nodded into his chest, though she couldn't manage words yet. As police handcuffed Michael and dragged him away, his furious shouts fading into the background, Daniel lifted Emily gently, resting her head on his shoulder. He carried her back through the garage, back into the hospital, back to Mary, who collapsed in relief at the sight of her daughter alive. Emily didn't let go of his hand even as her mother hugged her. She kept one small fist wrapped in the fabric of his shirt, as if afraid he might disappear if she loosened her grip even slightly. Daniel looked down at her, realizing with startling clarity that in this moment, nothing mattered more to him than the safety of this child. Not the company, not the scandal, not even his own wounds. Emily Hart had become the reason he fought, the reason he survived, and the reason he would never allow darkness into their lives again. He wasn't just protecting a witness. He was protecting someone who had already begun to change him. In the days following Michael's arrest, the world around Daniel seemed to shift in ways he hadn't expected. The hospital released him once the doctors were sure the poison had fully left his system, though they insisted on monitoring him for several more days. Security surrounded him everywhere he went now, but instead of feeling suffocated, he found an odd comfort in the precautions, because they weren't just for him anymore. Emily and Mary were under the same protection, and the thought of anything happening to them tightened something deep inside him that he hadn't realized existed until danger swept through their lives like a storm. When Daniel returned to his penthouse, he expected emptiness to greet him as it always did, the echoing silence, the cold glass surfaces, the sterile perfection of a home designed more for display than living. But this time, Emily was there, waiting with her mother on the sofa. The moment she saw him, she ran forward with a mixture of excitement and worry, her small steps quick and uneven, as if afraid he might vanish again if she moved too slowly. He braced himself just in time for her to wrap her arms tightly around his waist, burying her face into his shirt. "Does it still hurt?" she asked, pressing a gentle hand to his chest, her brows knitting together in concern. Daniel placed his hand over hers, easing her fear. "Not anymore. Especially now that I'm home." He didn't know why he said it, this penthouse had never felt like home before, but with her standing there, looking up at him with an expression so open and trusting, the word no longer felt wrong. Mary apologized repeatedly for staying in his home despite the discomfort she felt at intruding on his life. Daniel dismissed every concern she raised. He insisted they remain until authorities confirmed it was entirely safe for them to go anywhere alone. He wasn't willing to risk even the slightest chance that someone desperate or connected to Michael might try to retaliate. Emily's safety was not negotiable. Over the next few days, the atmosphere inside the penthouse transformed in ways Daniel couldn't have predicted. Emily, still carrying traces of fear, began to relax as she explored her new temporary world. She decorated the coffee table with her crayons, transforming the polished glass into a swirl of color. She insisted on showing Daniel every drawing she made, even the unfinished ones. She braided her doll's hair on the expensive rug. She giggled at the echo in the high-ceilinged living room, turning what was once a hollow space into something warm and alive. Daniel found himself adjusting to her presence more easily than he had expected. He'd never imagined he would be the type of man to learn which foods a child preferred or how to comfort one after a nightmare. But when Emily woke up screaming the first night, sobbing that Michael was still chasing her, Daniel was there within seconds, faster even than Mary, gathering the trembling girl into his arms. He held her until she calmed, whispering that nothing would ever hurt her again, that he wouldn't allow it. It surprised him how naturally the words came out and how deeply he meant them. One afternoon, he returned from meeting with investigators to find Emily sitting at the wide kitchen island, legs dangling above the floor as she concentrated on a new drawing. The sight slowed him more effectively than any exhaustion could. She looked up as soon as she sensed his presence, her face brightening. "You're back," she said with a smile so genuine it softened something inside him. "I made you something." Daniel approached, expecting another charming chaos of colors. But this drawing was different. In it, he recognized himself and Emily standing side by side. He was tall and drawn in a dark suit, she was tiny, wearing her red dress. Above them, she had drawn a bright golden light with a messy halo of sparkles surrounding it. "What's this light?" he asked gently, tracing the outline. Emily swung her legs, shy but pleased. "It's the feeling," she said simply. "The feeling?" He smiled a little. "The feeling when I'm with you," she explained. "It goes here." She touched her chest, just above her heart. Like something warm that wasn't there before. Daniel had no words. She didn't need him to answer. She simply handed him the picture, and he folded it with care, placing it safely in a drawer he never used, as if it were something priceless. Mary watched their interaction from the doorway with a soft, knowing sadness. When Daniel approached her later, she spoke quietly. "She's grown attached to you," she said, though without accusation. "After everything that happened, you became her hero. She trusts you in a way children don't trust many adults." Daniel nodded, fully aware of the weight of those words. "I care about her," he admitted. "More than I expected to." Mary offered him a small, grateful smile. "And she cares about you." As the days passed, Emily's laughter became a constant melody drifting through the halls, a stark contrast to the cold quiet Daniel had lived with for years. He found himself looking for her even when she wasn't in the room, listening instinctively for her footsteps, feeling a strange sense of peace whenever she sat near him. She would rest her head against his side while coloring or lean on his shoulder while watching cartoons, completely unafraid to claim that space beside him. But perhaps the most profound change came one evening just before sunset. Emily climbed onto the couch beside Daniel as he reviewed documents, then gently pushed the papers aside. She sat close enough that her knee touched his, then looked up at him with a seriousness unusual for her age. "Are you going to go away again?" she asked quietly. The question pierced deeper than she could have known. "Why would you think that?" "Because grown-ups always go away," she said simply. "Even the nice ones." Daniel set the papers aside and met her gaze fully. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice low but certain. "Not from you." Emily studied his face for a moment, then nodded and leaned against him, her small hand wrapping around two of his fingers. It was such a simple gesture, yet it anchored him in a way no deal, no power, no victory ever had. In that moment Daniel understood something he hadn't before: protecting Emily hadn't been a one-time act of gratitude or responsibility. It had become instinct. It had become purpose. He wasn't merely recovering from an attack or unraveling a betrayal. He was rebuilding something he never realized he lacked: a connection, a bond, a sense of belonging. Emily didn't just change the atmosphere of his home. She changed the landscape of his heart. Christmas Eve arrived quietly, as though the entire city had drawn in a soft breath and was holding it. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, layering the streets and rooftops in white. Inside Daniel's penthouse, the world felt transformed. Warm lights glowed across garlands draped along the staircase, and a beautifully decorated Christmas tree stood near the windows, shimmering with soft gold and red ornaments. Emily had insisted on choosing every decoration herself, often placing things too low or too close together, but Daniel hadn't corrected a single choice. It was the first year his home felt alive rather than staged, warm rather than immaculate, and he owed that entirely to a 5-year-old girl with a brave heart and a red dress. Emily sat cross-legged by the tree, humming a Christmas tune while arranging two little figurines she had found in a forgotten holiday box. Her mother watched nearby with quiet amusement, though the shadows of the last week still lingered in her expression. Daniel noticed it too, and he understood. After nearly losing her child, Mary was trying to adjust to safety that didn't feel permanent yet, to a peace that still felt fragile. But tonight was meant to heal, at least a little. Emily glanced over her shoulder when she sensed Daniel approaching. Her entire face brightened, and she jumped to her feet. "You're done with your meeting," she exclaimed, rushing toward him. She always did that now, ran to him without hesitation, trusting he would be there to catch her. And he always was. He nodded and knelt as she flung her arms around his neck. "I'm done," he said softly. "And I told you I'd be home before dinner." "I know," she murmured, resting her cheek against his shoulder. "I just wanted to see you." He held her for a moment longer than necessary, breathing in the faint scent of the shampoo she liked, then pulled back to look at her. "You've been busy decorating the tree," he said, eyeing the new cluster of ornaments that were all crowded on one side. She grinned proudly. "It's perfect now." Daniel smiled in return, because to her it was perfect, and therefore it was. When dinner finished and the evening settled into that warm, drowsy calm that only Christmas Eve seemed able to create, Emily tugged lightly on Daniel's hand. "I have something for you," she said, her voice suddenly shy. He faltered. "A gift? For me?" She nodded with what looked like a mix of excitement and nerves. "But you have to close your eyes." Daniel glanced at Mary, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. He knelt again and closed his eyes, feeling Emily's small hands leave his. He heard her padding across the floor, rustling something near the sofa, then returning slowly. Her footsteps were hesitant, almost trembling. "Okay," she whispered. Open them. Daniel opened his eyes and found Emily standing before him, clutching something small in both hands. It wasn't an object. It wasn't a toy. It was simply courage. Her courage. She took a deep breath. "I want to give you a word," she said softly, as if afraid the moment might break if she spoke too loudly. "It's my Christmas gift." Daniel's heartbeat slowed, anticipation settling deep in his chest. "What word?" Emily stepped closer until she was right in front of him, her blue eyes glistening with a mix of hope and fear. She held out her hands to him, and when he accepted them, she squeezed gently, gathering strength. "Daddy," she breathed, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want to call you Daddy, if you want that too." Silence fell like snowfall, soft but immense. Daniel stared at her, stunned not by the word itself, but by the depth of trust it carried. This little girl, who had barely survived fear after fear, who had faced danger with a courage beyond her years, was offering him something no one ever had before, a place in her heart that could never be taken lightly. He swallowed hard, not trusting his voice at first. Slowly, he lifted her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her small heartbeat flutter against his chest. "Yes," he whispered against her hair. "Yes, Emily. I want that more than anything." She clung to him instantly, relief shaking through her tiny frame, and he felt the sting of tears in his eyes. Not the painful kind he had known in secret moments of his life, but a warmth that spread inside him with surprising power. Mary covered her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks as she watched them, understanding that something irreversible, and profoundly beautiful, had just taken place. Emily pulled back slightly to look at him, her face glowing with joy. "So, you're really my daddy now?" Daniel cupped her cheek gently, brushing away the tear that clung to her lashes. "I've been yours from the moment you saved my life," he said. "I just didn't understand it then." She smiled, the purest, most radiant smile he had ever seen, and wrapped her arms around him again. That night, as snow continued to fall outside, Daniel felt the walls of his once empty life shift completely. His home no longer echoed. His heart no longer sat untouched behind glass. He had become something new, someone worthy of being looked up to by the bravest little girl he had ever known. Emily curled up against him on the couch, drifting toward sleep as he held her. Mary sat nearby, quietly grateful, watching as the man who once lived only for work now lived for something far greater. And Daniel understood, with absolute certainty, that the greatest miracle of this Christmas was not his survival. It was the small child who had saved him in more ways than one. Emily had given him his life back. And now, she had given him a name he never thought he would earn. Daddy.